Can you all see my screen here? I just pulled up the agenda for this meeting.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for whoever was able to chime in there. So just want to quickly walk through what we're going to do here. This is our first meeting, so we want to go around and do some brief intros for all working group chairs and chair teams and participants. And then we'll spend a few minutes reviewing the working group charter, and then talk through a draft of our first working group deliverable, which is a set of policy guiding principles. Then we'll take some time talking through the upcoming schedule and work plan. And then we'll have some time for discussion at the end on some specific questions surrounding additional resources that can help inform what this working group is doing with regard to deliverables and other activities. So with that, I think we'll kick it off with intros. Since I'm already speaking, I guess I'll start, and then maybe the strategy folks can go, and then I think we'll have maybe the co-chairs from and other designees from DEEP and then from Pura go, and then we'll go from there. So I'm Joe Goodenberry, a senior manager with Stratogen. I work on clean energy planning and emerging technology and economic impact analysis, and I'll be supporting this working group from a technical perspective and from an otherwise perspective somewhat too. So nice to meet you all. For those that I don't know, maybe I'll pitch it to Aaron Child at Stratogen as well.
Thanks so much, Joe. This is Erin Childs, Director at Stratogen Consulting. So excited to have our team supporting the Green Bank on this task force.
My name is Jennifer Gorman. I'm an analyst on the Stratogen team, and I'll be supporting the legwork on this work stream. So based on what everyone concludes today. I think we have one more team member, Kaya, on.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Kaya. I'm also an analyst on Joe's team, so really hope to, really glad to be here. And yeah, I think I will pass it on to other workgroup members.
Yeah, and I saw Brian pop up from Green Bank, so maybe Brian, I'll let you go first, and then we'll hand it to the co-chair groups.
Sure, I feel honored. Brian Farnan, General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer for the Connecticut Green Bank. Excited to be here and get some policy created.
Do we want to have the DEEP folks go next?
Not sure.
So everybody's just going to get.
Becca, I was deferring to you, but I'll do. And I think we know everyone on this. It's Araganis on the DEEP team working on hydrogen hub, hydrogen policy, hydrogen task force. I guess all things hydrogen. There's a bunch of us that are involved. So we're here. Hello.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, I'm Becca Treach. I'm a senior policy advisor at DEEP, primarily focused on the comprehensive energy strategy, but also supporting hydrogen under that role.
And hi, I'm Lydia, also from the DEEP team, research analyst, and supporting all the hydrogen work, especially with the hydrogen hub.
I think that's it for folks from DEEP. So Julia, do you want to speak for Pura?
Yes, I was just scrolling through the list to see if anyone else was able to join this afternoon. But hi, everyone. My name is Julia Dumaine. I am the Supervisor of Strategy and Operations for the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. I am Chairman Gillette's designee. Although our Director of Legislative Affairs may also pop in and out, Taryn O'Connor, I don't think she's here today, but I work primarily with Director Ryer on various undocketed and docketed matters, and will be point on the hydrogen task force. So thank you.
Thanks, Julia. And I think we'll have the folks from Dave Pitney chime in, and then after that, I'll probably just go down the list here, so it's not so much of a free-for-all. Apologies on that.
Hey, yeah, this is Alex Judd, Sophia Browningtown as well. We're two attorneys at Dave Pitney, a law firm supporting the Green Bank through this process, probably providing some research strength as well where needed. Happy to be a part of the call and looking forward to what we discuss here. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and so I think, yeah, I'll just call out folks if you want to just introduce yourselves, and we'll just go through with additional participants here. Andrea, do you want to start?
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Labawi with Toyota. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. office working on hydrogen advocacy and policy. And I'll be supporting Edmund Young, who's probably the primary Toyota person. I don't see him on here yet. Hopefully he'll be here soon.
Thanks, Andrea. I think Samantha, you'd be the next to go.
Hi, thanks. I'm Sam Danowski, she, her pronouns. I'm the state director of the Sierra Club's Connecticut chapter based in Hartford.
Trent Moulter.
Hi, everybody. My name is Trent Moulter. I'm president and CEO of Skyer. I've been in the hydrogen space for about 40 years now. At Skyer, we're working on filtration of hydrogen, so cleanup, and also compression of hydrogen.
Thanks. I think Tyler Anderson. Okay. Tyler, you're welcome to chime in, but if you don't want to, you're feeling a little shy, that's okay too. It looks like there's one other person on the phone, 202 number. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Sophia Browning. I'm with Dave Pitney.
Thanks, Sophia. Is there anyone else I missed? I want to make sure we got everybody here.
And just one quick thing I throw in about Dave Pitney, or even my role at the Green Bank. It's our intent is to provide all of you task force members with policy options. We basically want to offer it up, and we can hopefully move out of this with a consensus approach on certain items, or if not, that's okay too, because at the end of the day, we'll end up getting to the full task force and to the E&T chairs at some point. We'll be like, here are your various options, and here are ones where we have a consensus, here are ones we do not. But hopefully, myself or Dave Pitney can help kind of provide those options for you to then determine which ones you think are best.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's very helpful and a good tee up for, I think, our first agenda item here. We'll take a moment to walk through the charter here. Julia Dumaine Apura has volunteered to lead this discussion here, so I'll hand it over to her.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So yes, as the one of the chairman's designees, I have volunteered to talk about the proposed deliverables that this working group has put together in advance of this meeting. We've decided on a set of 5. So the first, which we will cover later in this meeting, is a set of policy guiding principles that both stakeholders and the other working groups on the task force can use to align their research and recommendations with any existing state policies, related to things such as the clean energy transition, environmental justice, workforce development, or any participation in broader regional hydrogen efforts. Excuse me. We will also be preparing a hydrogen policy readiness assessment. And this will look to take, an inventory of the current status of different hydrogen policies, regulations, and oversight across Connecticut state agencies. The third deliverable will be continued coordination with the other working groups to ensure that we're all working towards consistent policy development. And comprehensive policy development. The fourth is a best practices assessment. So distinct from number 2, which looks at what we're doing already in the state. This will kind of flag specific hydrogen policies that could be relevant for our policy or regulatory framework going forward. So looking to other jurisdictions. And then finally, we will prepare an assessment of hydrogen job creation opportunities using existing literature, Connecticut-specific opportunities, programs, or funding resources, and then any best practices on workforce development and transition that could be applicable to this particular industry. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And so as Julia mentioned, our first deliverable for this work group is a set of policy principles here. And I just want to take a moment to give a little bit of a background as to what we're intending from this set of principles here. You know, of course, with the task force and the working groups, we will all be developing recommendations here. And policy obviously is a thread that will sort of weave through all of that. And so we want to make sure that you know, recommendations are in alignment with the intent or the trajectory of existing policies in the state. And so, you know, what we're intending here is really a set of almost guardrails, right? You know, we've got 5 different work groups working in collaboration, but also independently. And so what we don't want is some work group to come up with some idea that might just be completely infeasible from a policy perspective, or might be completely contradictory to existing policy or existing policy trajectory in Connecticut. So the objective here is really just to clarify for all work group chairs or task force members and other participants, you know, how they can focus their recommendations to ensure alignment. And part of that is to indicate areas of state policy or law that should be incorporated into the planning process, areas of state policy or law that are known to need update or additional assessment to appropriately incorporate and address hydrogen-related opportunities, as well as areas where additional stakeholder engagement and record building or consensus might be necessary. And just a reminder here that, you know, the task force and the working groups, we're not intending to replace the stakeholder engagement process that's used to develop and vet updates to state policy. Really what we want to do here with these working groups and with the task force is to surface ideas for consideration on how to incorporate hydrogen into a clean energy economy. The other piece of this here is just making sure that throughout this process, we're ensuring transparency. And as the process continues, making sure that an environment is created to maintain that transparency throughout this. And so I'm going to hand it back to Julia here to talk through. We've got a set of 5 that we're proposing as policy guiding principles, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion, hopefully, after Julia goes through here.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So these are also serving, as he stated, as guardrails, but also sort of as filters to make sure that we're identifying appropriate policies or regulations that either need to be changed or you know, instated to achieve any kind of goals that we're looking for in the future that may be established by the other working groups. So the first is to ensure that we're in compliance. Whatever we're recommending is compliant with relevant state statutes that already exist and regulations. And you know, if there is a recommendation that's being made by another working group that maybe would be non-compliant with something, you know, identify any changes. The idea is to take a holistic look at these different existing statutes and regulations and make sure that we're weighing the pros and cons of any changes there too. Of course, this would also mean that we need to align with any active state policy or regulatory proceedings. So things that are occurring both at Pura or DEEP or elsewhere, and making sure that our recommendations are in alignment and coexisting with other concurrent initiatives or goals of the state. Again, this will also include identifying underlying policy or regulatory challenges or potential enablers. So again, taking that holistic inventory of the both sides of the coin, and then identifying expected impacts to active policy proceedings. So if we do make a recommendation, will there be any impacts to those active proceedings? And then finally, we need to identify a inventory of relevant stakeholder proceedings that could be used for additional public review and input and engagement to ensure that we're getting that perspective as well.
Thanks, Julia. So this is our first working group meeting here, so I do want to give all participants some opportunity here to comment on what Julia just spoke to, and some of the background that I had mentioned before that too. I'll kind of tee it off with some questions here, but I welcome some feedback related to the guiding principles, and certainly folks from DEEP, if you have anything additional to add during this conversation, that's greatly appreciated too. But just in general, are what we're proposing here as principles, do we feel that these 5 achieve the objectives and intent consistent with what I described before, Julia? And if not, what are some suggested changes that could help meet those objectives? Secondly, are there any principles that would be particularly applicable for other working groups? That's the uses, the sources, infrastructure, and funding working groups. If we have any specific call outs for those working groups that we think might be more targeted principles for them to consider as they're developing their deliverables and their recommendations. So I know I kind of said a lot there, and with these questions in mind, I want to solicit some feedback from the working group here. So does anyone want to chime in? And if, sorry, I should just ask too, because I know we're not all on camera and we're recording this, but when you speak, please do identify yourself before you ask a question and give feedback. Thank you. Oh, Andrea just asked a question if we have an org chart of other working groups for reference. Now, can you clarify, do you mean, I know we have all the charters, I believe, have been posted, as well as working group chairs. Andrea, do you mean more of a roster, or do you mean more of just what are the other working groups and their list of deliverables?
Oh yeah, just simply what are the other working groups? Because
oh, sure.
I have the email that you sent, so if it's any of those 3 documents, then I can open it myself. But if not, then I don't have access to it, sorry.
Joe,
Sure,
I can
yeah.
drop a link in the chat with descriptions of the other working groups for you, Andrea.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thanks, Jen. And I think reviewing those other charters will probably be helpful as well to give folks more of an idea of what deliverables from those working groups. But yeah, the other 4 are, there's a uses working group that obviously will work pretty closely with the sources working group. There's also an infrastructure working group, and then of course a funding working group as well. So, but no, great question, great flag. And
Thanks. I'm on the New Jersey task force, and it's organized slightly differently.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks. I just wanted to pull up again, our proposed 5 principles here. And I know we intend to present this at the next task force meeting too. So certainly encourage any comments or feedback here. I know that particularly number 1, we're working to hopefully develop a list of just a very initial top line list of relevant state statutes that relate to hydrogen. So just welcome any questions, comments, or feedback here. Is there anything that anyone thinks may be off the mark, or that we may have missed here? Hey, hi, Sarah.
Hi, Joe. This is Sarah Hari with the Connecticut Green Bank. I had a discussion this morning with Dave Pitney, and we suggested that something that be added to the list of things that we do is definitions that might be applicable to a wide variety of sources and uses. Things like, what does critical facility mean in Connecticut? What does environmental justice community mean in Connecticut? And making sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So just putting some definitions up there as something to include.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great idea to make sure we're all working from the same set of terminology here. That's terrific. Any other thoughts or comments? Checking the chat as well. Sorry. Okay, well, thank you. And, I know this is our first working group too, so hopefully we'll be in closer communication throughout. So if anyone wants to take more time between now and the next time, or even over the next couple of days, and want to shoot an email around to the group with other considerations or comments or feedback, certainly encouraged. But with that, we can move on to the next item in our agenda here. And this is just an idea of, the upcoming schedule for this working group and some proposed milestones here of what we'd like to do and when we'd like to share it. So the next working group meeting for this work group is in October on the 20th. And what we'd like to discuss in that meeting and have prepared more of is regional, national, and international policy best practices that would help facilitate hydrogen deployment. Another important piece of that too is best practices for jobs transition. I think there'll be a little bit more opportunity in this call to talk a little bit more about the workforce things, but I know that insurance is one thing that's been flagged as a potential area related to workforce development. But in general, we would like to do a deeper dive on our October working group meeting to talk about some of those workforce issues. And then the November meeting will be on the 29th. The goal for that one, we want to ideally be able to discuss some of the policy intersections with other working groups that kind of relates a little bit to the guiding principles, but also just in general our broader deliverable of making sure we have coordination across all 5 working groups. And we propose there too to do a little bit maybe of a deeper dive on some of the environmental justice issues and considerations, certainly critical from a policy and workforce development standpoint. And for the December working group meeting, that's on the 15th. I know that it's always hard around the holidays, so that had to be bumped up a little bit. There's less of a gap between November and December, but with that, we would like to share proposed results and findings for the legislative report. That includes recommended policy actions, both legislative and regulatory level, and again, workforce development recommendations. I think that's an area we're excited to dig deeper into. Any feedback or comments or questions about this proposed upcoming schedule? I know the dates are not proposed; those work groups are scheduled, those meetings are scheduled and set in stone here. But as far as timeline and some of the areas here in the plan for what we'll discuss on each of these meetings, any feedback or comments or questions on that from anyone?
Me, Lydia from Deep. I have a question and potentially feedback or recommendation. My question is the October meeting will be, this best practice, international best practices to facilitate hydrogen deployment will be them focused on, especially on the workforce development. Not getting into the environmental justice because this is going to be discussed in the November meeting, but will it be more focused on that? And if not, then my recommendation would be to try to get it a little bit more focused in this, and of course, the other policy issues that are also concerned in regard of hydrogen deployment. But I'm just concerned about the time. 1 hour goes very fast, and I think and there's a lot to be talked in the international sphere, what has been done, and also regionally and nationally, but also overseas. And we could maybe talk about everything and not anything at all at the same time. So that's my question, and just to focus a little bit on the work of this working group.
No, that's a great point, Lydia. I think you're right. And both of the we're policy and workforce development, both of those are very deep. And so if we're going to talk through best practices for both categories in the same meeting, I think you're right. There may be some concern with not being able to get deep enough, and can't really in an hour do a deep dive on either one of those. So perhaps we might want to rethink what we've got scheduled for each of these, and maybe the policy intersections piece of it, maybe that gets bumped up. I'm just suggesting that here, but again, any other if others have other comments or other suggestions, maybe that's something we can swap just to make sure that we have time to go deep enough.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I think the idea is great. It's just doing it in a more focused way, and it's perfect.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important flag, and also a challenge with how quickly this entire timeline of both the task force and the working group meetings are going. A month goes fast, or 3 weeks goes very fast in this case. So, yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think we might want to consider adjusting that a little bit. And particularly, we do want to make sure we can go on the jobs transition to workforce development piece. Make sure that we give that ample time. And I do think we're with the October task force meeting, Aaron, if you're still on, I think we're going to go into some of these issues on that too, but oh, there you are.
Yeah, I guess a couple of thoughts here. One, I think to the extent possible, would love to use the opportunity to send folks pre-read material. I also don't want us to waste all of our time together with everyone reading through slides, if that's something that can be done in advance. And then I think the other thing we'd really welcome any feedback on is whether there's areas where folks have specific questions or areas of interest in terms of seeing best practices. So, for example, Sarah, really helpful to hear from you about the interest in getting some definitions landed, so that other work groups can benefit from that. But that might also help us to prioritize our time together.
Yeah, and only with monthly meetings too, and 3 more before the end of the year. I kind of want to second, re-emphasize Aaron's point about if there's better ways that we can help communicate in the meantime through email and otherwise. And part of that is too making us make sure we're getting things out to the working group early enough so there is time for feedback and then follow-ups and other discussions. So yeah, very helpful. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments, either related to Lydia's comment or just in general on our proposed schedule here and discussions at each of the next working group meetings?
Maybe just to provide one piece of context for folks as we're contemplating the schedule and how everyone wants to engage on this, is that Joe has flagged that in November we're expecting to see some discussion on policy intersections with other working groups. And I think that's going to be a really nice point. We are hoping to have some draft results coming out of our work groups on uses, sources, infrastructure, and funding. And so that will be a nice time. Policy is unfortunately oftentimes stuck in this challenge of showing up after a lot of the analysis has been done, and we want to make sure that there is some time for the policy work group to really dig in on some of these findings and think through the policy implications and how to carry those forward. So I do want to make sure that we're creating that space in November.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so with that, we'll move it and kind of open up a slightly broader discussion here, and we want to center this discussion around really 4 areas here, and this is where ideally we're getting a lot of from the broader working group. We welcome all of your thoughts. Just in general, are there national or international examples of successful or maybe ideas that didn't work, hydrogen policy that we can learn from here as we're looking at the state of Connecticut? In addition, are there any resources or other references that we should be considering for incorporation into these processes and assessments? And are there any specific industries to target for workforce development strategies and related policy recommendations? I mentioned insurance, and I know that George Bradner had sent around some information on that too, and there's been some discussion on that. So, but welcome any feedback on specific industries. And then in general, are there other considerations that this working group should account for in what we're developing as far as deliverables and recommendations? And so I'll pause there and just if folks have comments or thoughts on this or any input in any of these 4 areas, and I know these are relatively broad and then somewhat by design, but please feel free to chime in with any thoughts. I know that part of what we're doing in the first stage, in addition to the guiding principles, is we're working on preparing, as we said, the sort of set of best practices. So this first question in particular, relates very highly to that with, what has worked, what hasn't worked, or what's maybe too soon to know if it's worked. But part of that assessment is seeing, what other folks are doing from a policy standpoint. So.
This is Julia Dumaine. This is not necessarily something that I think has been determined to be successful or unsuccessful yet, but the Federal Department of Energy released draft guidance for a clean hydrogen production standard late last week in order to be consistent with the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I think this is an example of maybe something that we should be looking at and trying to, if this ends up becoming DOE's standard, how do we interact with that, and how do our recommendations align with it?
Regarding to that, actually, DOE is also accepting comments on this draft guidance, so this could also potentially be something that we could discuss. Although I think the comments are due before our next meeting, so if this is something that we could, if you want to think in this working group and
I think they're actually due
think
the
of it
exact same day as our next
yeah
working group.
yeah so if we want to think about this collectively, we should act fast.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll also flag here that we have the sources working group as well as part of this entire project, and a definition of clean hydrogen is something that's a particular area where there's overlap between the work that we're doing and the work that the sources group is doing. So as you said, Lydia, if we do want to comment on that, we want to make sure we're coordinating with them as well in our acting fast, I suppose. But and yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Julia. Do folks have any concerns on that and what DOE has suggested? Samantha, I just saw you pop up on screen.
I did. I was trying to find the raise hand function.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we're going to get to this, but I feel like we're skipping over what our own state policies are, because it's going to be really important to comply with those or understand what they are as we, even consider the federal policy, because ours is different, or there are other things we need to, we need to understand, like, what the parameters are we're working under right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's part of what we want to do with sort of an initial policy scan and a readiness assessment from this work group is what is the starting point here, and that feeds into the guiding principles as well, and making sure that we've got the right guardrails there to ensure that there's consistency here, and what is the sort of current state of play in Connecticut from a policy perspective. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think some of the areas I think about are our climate goals, our clean energy goals, our clean air goals, public health goals, and then making sure that we have access to, I think it was on this, resources or reference documents that can help us understand what the impact might be against those goals.
Yeah, great point. To that end, are there other resources or documents that we want to make sure we're considering in the work that we're doing here? If anyone has any other suggestions. And I see. Yeah.
I had sent a number of reports in a document to Sarah and Brian, and I don't know if they've ended up in the kind of the resource area, but I'm happy to share that with this group as well. And there's certainly, new reports and resources emerging all the time, but I think that could be a helpful starting point from the environment perspective about the things that we're thinking about in this work.
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. I would encourage you, yeah, please do send those around. I know they've made their way through Green Bank a bit, but if you're able to send that around to the broader working group, this group of folks, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
We haven't talked about this, but I'm looking at the Green Bank's website for this task force, and part of me wonders if it might be helpful to post some of these questions to that page where people are able to submit public comments as an opportunity for people to follow up on these at a later date. If it's maybe just making this presentation publicly available, or I'm not sure, maybe just the slide, whatever we decide to, that will help funnel people to these types of questions and getting input.
Yeah, and I think keying that up with, maybe not this entire presentation, but certainly a truncated form or with the charter and the guiding principles, I think would be a great way to solicit feedback on that. Aaron, I saw you pop up, so I'll let you chime in.
I was just going to say, I think we are planning to make a lot of these, materials, recording, presentation, et cetera, available to folks. And we very much welcome feedback if there's anything that we can do to improve folks' ability to engage in these work group meetings. We are really interested to get feedback from participants. And Samantha, thank you for popping up and chiming in. We really appreciate that. And we want to make sure that anyone who is interested or has, an interest to engage on this work does have that opportunity, and that we're equipping them well to engage. So thank you, Julia, for bringing that up, because I think that's an important one.
And this third question on workforce development, I know we talked a little bit about, we do intend to do a deeper dive in subsequent meetings in this working group. But if folks have thoughts or comments on, I mentioned the insurance industry that's been talked about a little bit already with some of the things being emailed around. But any other specific industries that folks think it's critical to target when we're looking at workforce development best practices or recommendations or strategies, and in relation to policy recommendations as well.
This is Andrea from Toyota. I'm still trying to get a kind of a foothold on the state of play right now. I'm sending over a link to the document from DEEP. That's the electric vehicle state strategy. And certainly it's not new to you guys. I'm just wondering, do you have a library of documents that are similar to that for people to review to understand the state of play, like you say? Because this document, of course, is primarily for battery electric vehicles, but it does mention some strategy and some policy recommendations, including fuel cell vehicles. Is that something that you want to start fresh on, or do you want to kind of do a collection of what the current policies are or the current recommendations?
I think as a starting point, collection of what the current recommendations, at least initially, and I know that what we will be developing ultimately from the task force and the working groups is, a set of our own recommendations, but certainly those will be largely informed by other areas as well.
Mhm.
As far as I think you asked about, if we're the intent, I think you're asking the intent of this work group to develop a library of these resources. Is that what you meant with that question? Or similar resources?
Well, I've just been thinking of kind of, I think the Sierra Club mentioned it, like what's the current state of play? So that we know where we are, such that we can make recommendations on where we need to go.
Sure. Yeah. And I think part of what we will be developing in our policy scan and readiness assessment will include that. But it sounds like what I'm hearing from the feedback here too, we need to make sure that we're getting that information out in as transparent and a widest net as possible, so that folks have access to that, so they can further engage on it and comment.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like documents such as this are going to be swept up by your policy scan.
Yeah, and it's Alex from Day Pitney. It's helpful. I mean, we'll try and capture all these, but if folks on this call have the link you provided, Andrea, just send them to us, to Joe, and we'll collect them as well to make sure we're there's so much out here depending on how you want to splice it, that we want to make sure to cover all our bases. So we'll do kind of just what you're talking about, but also if you guys have resources, feel free to send them along.
And then to the last question here, just any other considerations that this working group, and certainly is in conjunction and coordinating with other working groups, that we should be accounting for as we are developing deliverables at each step of the process here. I know we're just kind of getting kicked off right here now, but getting things kicked off, I should say, sorry. But as we said before, this is a relatively rapid timeline here. And thank you, Samantha. I appreciate folks dropping things in the chat as reference. This is super helpful. And that this is in line with the type of things that we want to, I think this relates even to the guiding principles document that we're looking to develop and share at the broader task force here, to make sure that what's being developed here is consistent with these issues.
So just I love folks chiming in on the chat with resources. This is great. I think themes I'm hearing from everyone is, Samantha, I'm seeing you flag some themes around GHG goals, carbon goals, and how hydrogen may play into compliance with or attainment of those GHG goals. I'm reading between the lines a little bit, so tell me if that's not right. I think, Andrea, I'm seeing there's a little bit of end use discussion on sort of end use applications potentially for hydrogen, as well as again sort of the roadmap that we're creating in terms of compliance with GHG goals. Am I appropriately reflecting the areas of interest that I think folks are highlighting with the resources that they're putting in the chat? Okay, Samantha, this is great. Ozone compliance, also really good. These are exactly sort of the thematic areas of feedback that we're really interested to receive.
I think I saw a thumbs up from Andrea as well, so hopefully that's a yes to what Aaron had said.
Yeah. Double thumbs up. Okay, great. Perfect.
Any other questions or comments or concerns from what we've discussed in this inaugural call so far? and even with what's being sent around here in the chat, just again, I'll second Aaron's point that we really appreciate this and really encourage it, and we can already start to develop these even right after this call, send around all these resources and get these collected in a coherent way too. So.
And strategy team, let's chat about how we can, make some of this public and solicit further feedback from groups in a timely fashion. I like that suggestion. And just also, from the Green Bank side, really appreciate both our co-chairs devoting all their time to working with us on this to help lead, and then everybody who was able to attend today. Thank you so much for your input, and looking forward to working through some of these really big topics with you all.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you all
Sarah.
again. Oh, go ahead.
Oh my gosh, sorry, Joe. I would just say also we have a dedicated email for kind of coordination and logistics for Hydrogen Task Force, and we are happy to continue to take feedback or resources offline if folks continue to think of things that are relevant, and we can distribute that email just as a reminder to this group as a place to send things. But we will of course be capturing everything that has already been sent in the chat. Back to you, Joe.
No, yeah, thank you, Aaron. And Jen just dropped that email address into the chat if folks have seen it here. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to that or myself or just the group if you wish to. So I want to second what Sarah had said. Thank you all so much for your participation in this working group and on this call. And special thanks to the folks at Pure and Deep and for co-chairing. And so with that, unless there's any other questions, comments, concerns with any of the things we've talked about here today, I think we can go ahead and close the meeting. But thank you all again. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, all.